This is Leonarda, and she has a secret. Behind the image of a sweet old lady lies what she really is, a monster. When people found out what was boiling in her pot, she became known worldwide. Over the years, I've heard many people tell her story, and I thought I knew it well. But my research has led me down some unexpected paths, and there's a lot more to this case than at first glance, and after finding things people seem to have missed, I was forced to arrive at one conclusion. We may have gotten her story all wrong.
Vivere senza malinconia, vivere senza più gelosia.
While I'm by no means an expert on this case, I've been kind of obsessed with it for the last couple of weeks, and I've navigated my way through Italian sources in order to get as accurate of information as possible. You'd be surprised how much more information you can get by using the translate button. I'd like to break this video down into 3 parts. Each one is a piece of the puzzle, and once we have them all, you'll never look at this case the same way again. If you think you already know about this case, I promise you're going to learn something new. And don't worry if you've never heard of it at all. In order to fully understand this story, we have to start from the top. This is the second time the Fanti siblings have come to the police station to file a report about their missing family member. It's been nearly 2 months since their sister-in-law Virginia Cacioppo disappeared without a word to them. The first time they filed a report, the police investigation wasn't all that great. This time around, though, Alberta Fanti had discovered something that she believed would make a new investigation not only necessary, but a priority. She had compiled documents showing that not only was her sister-in-law missing, but so were 2 other women. A new investigation was opened at once. It wouldn't take long before investigators discovered that all 3 women were individually seen spending a lot of time with the same person. Some called her the cake lady, as she was well known for generously giving out her homemade tea cakes to anyone who came by her home. And many people would stop by, especially because she was skilled in palm reading and astrology. Her name was Mrs. Pensardi, but nowadays everyone knows her by her family name, Cianciulli. The police had their lead, and they immediately bring her in for questioning. Leonarda Cianciulli wouldn't budge under interrogation, claiming she was completely innocent of any involvement or knowledge of the disappearances. Despite all leads pointing to her, the lead investigator, Chief Scagliarini, would determine she was telling the truth, and with that, she was free to go. It seems that this upset basically everyone involved in the investigation. It wasn't long before they ran out of leads and arrived at a dead end, just like the first investigation. Many wondered if this case would ever be solved. The Fanti family and others would keep applying pressure to the police, feeling that the investigation was being poorly conducted. This pressure actually worked, as eventually Scagliarini was replaced by Salvatore Toma as chief. Soon after he assumed his station, he immediately turned his attention back to their best lead, Leonarda Cianciulli. After bringing her in for questioning again, the new chief let her know that he wasn't holding back, and that he would even be investigating her whole family. As soon as her family is involved, she does something police didn't expect. She confesses to the murder of all 3 women. The MO for each murder is the same. Cianciulli would convince the victim that she had found an opportunity for them in a different city. For one, that meant a husband, and for the others, it was a job instead. She had each victim write postcards dated in the future to be mailed later so their family would know they were doing well. She'd invite them over for one last visit, and while their guard was down, she murdered them with either an axe, a hammer, or simply strangled them. The bodies were butchered into pieces and boiled in a pot filled with caustic soda. The congealed mess was poured into a septic tank, and whatever couldn't be disposed of this way was thrown in the Porta Reggio Canal. Shocked by her story, the police would detain her, and a forensic investigation of her house went underway, and they knew the first place to look. In the sludge of the septic tank, investigators would discover bone fragments from a skull and dentures. Miss Setti's dentist would confirm that they belonged to her. Cianciulli was arrested along with her son Giuseppe. This was because Leonarda had tasked her son with traveling and mailing the postcards her victims wrote from the cities that they were supposed to have gone to. They were both set to stand trial, but as fate would have it, due to the war, the trial date would be continuously rescheduled. During this limbo, Leonarda's son Giuseppe would be held in jail, while Leonarda herself would be first placed in an asylum for psychological evaluation. With no clear end to her asylum stay, she decided to keep herself busy with one of the only ways that she could. She began writing. Nearly 2 years later, she had filled up 6 notebooks by hand, which were later converted into 700 typewritten pages. Leonarda documented her life, all the way from her childhood up to the murders. For starters, she wrote that when her mother was a young girl, she was sexually assaulted, and once she realized she was pregnant, she informed her family what happened. But they then forced her to marry the offender. Leonarda was the product of this assault and described how her mother resented her for it throughout her childhood, which, as you can imagine, had a horrible impact on her.
I tried twice to hang myself. Once, they arrived in time to save me, and the other time, the rope broke. My mother made it clear to me that she regretted seeing me alive again. Once I swallowed 2 stays from her corset, again with the intention of dying, and I ate shards of glass. Nothing happened.
Leonarda writes that during her youth she had an encounter with a palm reader who basically said what no one wants to hear when having their fortune read. She had a horrible destiny. The fortune teller would say that Leonarda would get married, but that's where the good news ended. Her marriage would produce many children, but they would all die before their time, with 4 to 5 dying as adults due to the war. And as for Leonarda herself, the fortune teller said that in her right hand she saw prison and in her left, the asylum. Leonarda kept this encounter in the back of her mind ever since. At the age of 23, Leonarda would get married to Raffaele Pansardi, apparently to the disapproval of her mother, who cursed their relationship. But despite this curse and the terrible fate that was said to be awaiting her, they had several children together. And it seems that the fortune teller was truly gifted. Leonarda writes that she had 17 children and 13 had died young. It's here in her writings where we first learn her real motivations for the killings and the true magnitude of her depravity. The records aren't totally clear, but in 1939, prior to the killings, either one or both of her younger sons, Bernardo and Biagio, had been drafted. Then Leonarda got word that Giuseppe, her eldest and favorite son, was deemed fit for the draft. The fortune from so long ago truly seemed inescapable. But then something strange happened.
One night, my mother appeared to me in a dream. She told me that only with a sacrifice of human blood could I save my son from death. I found no peace until I carried out what I had been commanded.
And that's exactly what she did. Those 3 women were sacrificed in order to protect her children. In fact, in her memoirs, she would sometimes refer to them as martyrs. But just killing these women wasn't enough on its own. She had to go further. At one point she writes,
I committed this crime for my son Bernardo, who was about to leave, so various times I made him eat what I will tell later. Goddess Teti gave a magic bath to her son, but I'm no goddess, so I thought to make my children eat the victim's blood. She had cancer, so I thought to boil that blood for 3 hours, then to mix it with chocolate in order to make cakes and let my children eat it.
And then at another point she writes,
I threw the pieces into a pot, added 7 kilos of caustic soda, which I had bought to make soap, and stirred the mixture until the pieces dissolved in a thick, dark mush that I poured into several buckets and emptied in a nearby septic tank. As for the blood in the basin, I waited until it had coagulated, dried it in the oven, ground it, and mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk, and eggs, as well as a bit of margarine, kneading all the ingredients together. I made lots of crunchy tea cakes and served them to the ladies who came to visit, though Giuseppe and I also ate them.
But as for her last victim, Virginia Cacioppo, she had some other ideas for her body.
She ended up in the pot like the other 2. Her flesh was fat and white. When it had melted, I added a bottle of cologne, and after a long time on the boil, I was able to make some most acceptable creamy soap. I gave bars to neighbors and acquaintances. The cakes too were better. That woman was really sweet.
Her asylum observation period ended soon after she was finished writing. In fact, the doctor observing her didn't want to release her until she was finally done with her memoirs, as he felt they would be needed for his diagnosis and therefore her trial. She was then held in jail for around 3 years until she got the news she'd been waiting for. Her trial was finally scheduled for June 12, 1946. At this point, it had been 5 years since her arrest. The trial was a massive media spectacle. Even international news crews had come to get a look at the Soap-Maker of Correggio and her son. The image of a wrinkled old woman who kills people and turns them into soap and cake is something out of a folktale. Frankly, she scared a lot of people. It's been recorded that during the trial, there were times whenever a lawyer came close to Leonarda, She would mime snapping a chicken's neck. The mother and son were each facing charges for murder, destruction of a corpse, and for robbery, as the victim's belongings were stolen. While on the stand, she would simply reiterate what she had already confessed to in her memoirs. And she also made sure to really emphasize that her son Giuseppe had nothing to do with it, stating that she was able to convince him to mail those letters by telling him that the women just wanted to relocate in private without much fuss from their families. A little over a month later, on July 20th, 1946, Leonarda Cianciulli was found guilty. Her son was acquitted due to lack of evidence. The judge had taken her psychological state into account and considered her to have a degree of diminished capacity. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison after a mandatory 3-year treatment in an asylum. And that's more or less where the story ends. Okay, well, that seems pretty clear-cut, right? I mean, you're probably thinking in the beginning of the video, he made it sound like there was going to be some kind of critique or new information. I mean, that seemed pretty straightforward, so what could possibly be wrong? So first, a bit of background. While I was researching this story, I found out about a 2008 Italian documentary that covered this case. Me being me, I was tempted by the possible insights that this movie would have to offer, and I knew I'd have to watch it. But there was a problem. I couldn't find it. Anywhere. I knew it was a bit of a niche movie, but I checked all kinds of websites looking to buy, rent, or stream this movie, and I came up empty-handed. But after some digging, I found this YouTube video. This here is the director of the documentary I'd been searching for. In this video, he's promoting his next film idea, which can kind of be boiled down to Mindhunter meets Leonarda Cianciulli. In this 2-hour presentation, he actually gives a rundown of the case, showing archival documents and photographs he and the journalist he worked with essentially rediscovered, even showing clips from the documentary that I've been looking for this whole time. And frankly, what he says about the case in this presentation kind of destroyed a lot of what I thought I knew about the case. And as if to laugh at me from the past, he actually hands out free copies of his documentary to the crowd. If only I could watch this movie. What's the worst that could happen? There are some pretty glaring flaws in the standard Leonarda Cianciulli narrative. The documentary makes it clear that when we take a closer look at the facts, we end up with a series of important realizations. I've actually already alluded to some of them, but one of the most critical is this. Leonarda Cianciulli's backstory, her childhood, the fortune teller, the motivation for killings as a means to save her children, how she did it, how she disposed of the bodies, turning the remains into cakes and soap. There's only one source for this information, Leonarda Cianciulli herself. The vast majority, if not all of this, comes only from her memoirs. Remember that she's writing this in an asylum awaiting trial. The upcoming trial is basically a formality. I mean, confession aside, there's no doubt she killed these women. In fact, it was noted that the trial seemed to focus more on determining her son's presumed innocence. Pretending to be insane or having diminished capacity is a pretty common tactic for people facing serious charges in court in an attempt to get more lenient sentencing. Any presiding judge usually defers to a professional psychological assessment in these instances. The documentary notes that when she was nearing 2 years of observation, investigators would ask her doctor what was taking so long for his finished assessment. He explained that he was extremely overworked and severely understaffed due to the war, and that he was waiting for her to finish writing her memoir since it would be useful in making his assessment. Records show that his report was almost entirely based on her memoirs, and he took everything at face value. Ultimately, he would determine that she had a diminished capacity, given the whole human sacrifice thing. This also explains her theatrics at the trial, really leaning into the insanity angle. In her memoirs, Leonarda was actually very specific in the quantities and measurements of the caustic soda she used. At one point, she even specified how much she'd buy from the local grocer. They actually brought the grocer in to corroborate, but it's recorded that he completely disagreed, saying that she actually bought way less, and in some instances, even none at all. The court-appointed anatomopathologist analyzed these soap-making claims and stated that given the quantities and methods specified, what she had claimed was impossible, and he doubted if she was even physically capable or knowledgeable enough to butcher the bodies in the way she described. Further, investigators weren't able to find any evidence of the soap she claimed to have made and given out. And to top it all off, there's some serious doubts as to whether or not Leonarda was actually the one who wrote her memoirs. She had minimal formal education, only going as far as elementary school. The documentary notes that records of her writings prior to the memoir show bad writing and grammar, whereas the memoirs don't have this problem. Other than that, the actual contents of the memoirs consist of a lot of references to Greek classics and quotes spanning a large body of literature. It really read like it was written by someone with a good education who was very well read, especially for the time. And that definitely did not sound like Leonarda Cianciulli. The obvious follow-up question would be, well then, who wrote it if not her? There's no real evidence to provide an answer to this, but from what I can tell, the prevailing theory is that it could have been her lawyers. Learning this was pretty eye-opening for me. I mean, the way this story has been remembered, and how I even heard of it in the first place, has always been about this crazy old lady serial killer who turned her victims into soap and cakes. I mean, go ahead and Google her right now, and that's what you'll see. To learn that there's basically no evidence that she did this to her victims was honestly pretty shocking. But it gets worse. The thing that really caught me off guard was learning that she definitely didn't commit these crimes alone. And I'm not talking about her son Giuseppe, by the way, though he absolutely was complicit even if he didn't kill them himself, which we'll get into in a moment. No, I mean that there are way more people involved in this than I even thought possible. As it turns out, when Leonarda initially confessed to the murders under police interrogation, she actually implicated many other people. For the murder of Miss Setti, Leonarda stated that while she was the one who strangled her, Miss Setti's housemate, Aristide Sacchetti, was the one who cut up the body, which was supposedly later boiled. Mr. Sacchetti actually passed away not long prior to Leonarda's murder confessions, and I unfortunately couldn't find his cause of death. As for the killing of Miss Cacioppo, Leonarda actually stated that it was a man named Abelardo Spinabelli who was lying in wait with an axe who was responsible for the murder and butchering of the body. She again said she basically just helped dispose of it. It's also rumored that Leonarda may have been having an affair with Mr. Spinabelli. There's more to him than only this, so try to keep him in mind, and we'll come back to this in a few moments. One of the witnesses at the trial was Leonarda's teenage housemaid, Nelle Barigazzi, and she would recount some really dark stories involving Leonarda, but not any other member of the family. In this documentary, they actually interview this housemaid, and she would implicate both the son Giuseppe and the father. Nella mentioned that she once looked inside Giuseppe's briefcase that he'd take with him all the time, and she found bloodstains all over the inside. One night, while a pot was boiling on the stovetop, she tried to lift the lid, but Leonarda shouted at her not to, and that if she did, there was a risk of it exploding. Nella noted that the father was present at the table, but didn't say anything during this interaction. She followed that the next morning a foul smell was emanating from the toilet. It's not completely clear why Nella didn't mention this at the trial, but she was around 14 years old at the time and was probably too scared to. One of Leonarda's neighbors had also given testimony that they saw a blood-stained jacket belonging to the father leaning against one of the windows. So at this point, you probably have several questions on your mind, and they probably begin with the word why. If Leonarda didn't kill these women as part of a sacrifice ritual, then why did she do it? If it's true that there were accomplices, why would they help her? And of course, why weren't they held on trial too? Even though it's only speculation, there's really only one answer that satisfies these questions. It was organized crime. This next bit might be slightly hard to follow, but I'll try to make it as clear as I can. The main reason why these groups do anything really is for money. It appears that Leonarda Cianciulli took payment for the services provided to these three women, sort of a finder's fee if you will. On top of that, she stole more cash, jewelry, and bonds that the deceased had. The exact amount of money made from the victims varies pretty heavily depending on the sources, but in general it seems that Leonarda made in modern currency around 90 to 114,000 USD, adjusting for inflation. At the time of the investigation into Miss Cacioppo's disappearance, police got a heads up when a 400 lire treasury stock under Virginia Cacioppo's name had been sold by someone they couldn't have expected. It was sold by Father Adelmo Frattini, the head of the San Prospero Church. It's a bit weird that someone holding a high station in a powerful institution like the Catholic Church would be involved with this in any way. I mean, how did he even acquire something belonging to Cacioppo? As it turns out, it was given to him by none other than Mr. Spinabelli, the one Leonarda claimed actually murdered Miss Cacioppo. Police investigation found that Spinabelli visited Father Frattini very often. Spinabelli would claim that Leonarda simply gave him these things for safekeeping, saying that she and her husband were having fights all the time and she just needed to keep these things somewhere safe. The documentary records that he was given around 11,000 lire in cash and checks, a bracelet, and a hollow concrete block which contained Miss Cacioppo's jewelry. Spinabelli gave all of these items to Father Frattini, and apparently they were found in the house of the mother of Father Frattini's maid, which is weird. Let's go back to the murder of Miss Setti. As I mentioned earlier, Leonarda claimed that Miss Setti's housemate, Mr. Sacchetti, helped in dismembering the body. Well, as it turns out, while under interrogation, Leonarda implicated a man by the name of Medardo Mariani. What's important to know here is that Mariani was a local landowner who brokered a deal with Miss Setti and her housemate, Mr. Sacchetti, to sell her estate 2 days before she went missing. Leonarda also loaned some money to a local farmer soon after Miss Setti's death. The film also notes that it appears that Father Frattini was connected to all of these individuals in various ways. Generally speaking, most criminal groups try, in multiple ways, to get some form of protection from authorities. At the very beginning of this story, we learn that Miss Cacioppo's family, the Fanti siblings, are at the police station for the second time. The first investigation didn't go anywhere, but even after they get another investigation opened, the police chief and lead investigator, Chief Scagliarini, almost immediately dismisses Leonarda as a suspect after she claims innocence. In fact, Leonarda began formally complaining about those accusing her, and Chief Scagliarini warned those accusers that they risked legal action from Leonarda if they pursued this. It was almost as if the chief was protecting her. Oh, did I mention that the documentary states that the police chief and Leonarda were neighbors? Yeah. And remember, it's only once Scagliarini is replaced that Leonarda eventually confesses. As a side note, Leonarda actually had a history of defrauding people. In 1918, 2 poor farmers had lost their son in the war. Leonarda, at the age of 25, sent them a letter pretending to be their son. The letter claimed that he was alive and avoided execution, but he just needed some money to bribe the officer holding him. She was arrested and found guilty for this, but got pardoned and didn't have to serve jail time at all. Okay, so then all that said, why weren't all of those who were implicated also on trial for this criminal conspiracy? Well, some of them were arrested, but in a nutshell, there basically wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone other than Leonarda Cianciulli and her son Giuseppe. Actually, Mr. Spinabelli ended up suing Leonarda for libel and won. After being found guilty of the murders, Leonarda Cianciulli is supposed to spend 3 years in an asylum before going to prison. But that 3 years turns into nearly 30, until on the 15th of October, 1970, she ultimately died of a stroke. She was 77. She was buried on the property in a simple grave, a mercy that could not be given to her victims. It's weird to think that the legend of the cannibal Soap-Maker of Correggio was probably just that, a legend. It's difficult to tell the lies from the truth. It's worth mentioning that the documentary notes that they were able to actually find records of Leonarda giving birth to around 13 children, but they were only able to determine what happened to 9 of them. There's enough suspicious loose ends in this story that deserve more investigation, but due to time, it's likely we'll never actually know the truth. I want to thank the director Alessandro Quadretti for putting this film together and sending it my way. And I also want to take a moment to thank the journalist in the film, Fausto Bassini. It seems he's built a reputation on being the expert on this case, and I just have a lot of respect for the amount of work he's put in. And of course, I want to thank you so much for watching. It truly means more to me than you can imagine. There are a few more things I wanted to share with you guys, but I couldn't quite figure out where to fit it in this video. So I'm just going to use this time to mention some of these not so fun facts. If we take the human sacrifice as a means to protect her son's angle, then oddly enough, it kind of worked. I say this because Giuseppe was held in jail for around 5 years, and because of that, he actually avoided the draft. Giuseppe and the other 2 brothers mentioned all lived to at least 70 years old. Earlier in the video, I spoke about one of Leonarda's housemaids, but she actually had 2, both of them young girls. And some people even consider her to be another victim of Cianciulli because she went mad from what she saw in the house. She was first committed to an asylum at the age of 20, and she just ended up spending most of her life there. The documentary notes that it's been recorded that while she was in her delirium, she would often mention Cianciulli. A 2018 academic paper would use modern script analysis to try and determine if Leonarda Cianciulli wrote her memoirs herself by analyzing the memoir script and other letters she is supposed to have written. Their findings concluded that they actually do match. but my understanding is that it's not enough to say with absolute certainty that she wrote everything. The Rome Museum of Criminology has her murder weapons on display. The Leonarda Cianciulli case had a large impact on Italian culture, and it seems like many forms of media have, at one point or another, either referenced or have been based on her, but it's also not limited to Italy. Going back to Italian cinema though, there's a 2016 short film called Leonarda, which is written by and stars Rosaria Cianciulli, who plays Leonarda in the film. Rosaria is Leonarda's great-great-niece, and Rosaria's real-life mother plays Leonarda's mother in the film. In 1950, there was a film crew who wanted to put together a short documentary of the Aversa Asylum, because they had an unused permit for the location. As fate would have it, Leonarda Cianciulli would make an appearance. It's one of the only videos we have of her.
La legge mi ha condannato. E che mi importa della sua condanna? 30 anni l'ergastolo e la fucilazione. Ma che mi interessa a me? 17 figli. Ah, cari miei, se anche a voi moriranno 13 figli, non solo faresti ciò che ho fatto io. Una madre solo può comprendermi. La legge mai. Forse la scienza mi ha compreso.
The journalist in the documentary I mentioned earlier, Fausto Bassini, seems to still be digging into the case after all this time. In April of 2024, while digging through some national archives, Mr. Bassini would discover the last known photographs taken of Leonarda Cianciulli. They're dated for July of 1970, just 3 months before she passed away. There's so much that I've had to choose to cut out from this video, but I hope you now understand what I meant in the opening about this case being much more than it seemed. Honestly, it reminds me of the story of El Salvador's Hugo Osorio, nicknamed the Psychopath of Chalchuapa. If you're interested, I've made a video on him that you can watch here. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.